So one of the things that the animals that live out in the open ocean have to do in order to survive is to remain afloat. Okay, so the phytoplankton need to stay afloat because they need to stay in the photic zone in order to do photosynthesis to remain alive. And then the zooplankton need to stay afloat because they need to stay in the photic zone because that's where the phytoplankton are and that's their source of food. So they have to stay afloat. There's several methods that animals and plants will use in order to accomplish this. One of the things that they will do is to swim. Right? Both some of the phytoplankton and some of the zooplankton will swim. And there's different swimming methods that they can use. They can use flagella or cilia or use jet propulsion. How many of you remember what a flagella or cilia is? Okay, what does this mean? Like a little tail, yeah. So a flagella is like a whip-like tail that they can use to propel themselves through the water. Cilia are like hair-like extensions that they can use to beat and move through the water as well. So things that will use the flagella and cilia, dinoflagellates, they will use flagella. Okay, you looked at dinoflagellates under the microscope. And then you also have ciliates and some types of larvae will use cilia, okay, to move. For jet propulsion, you'll get things like jellyfish. Jellyfish will use jet propulsion. Also things like squid will use jet propulsion. And then like the siphonophores that we talked about in the salps. So they'll all use jet propulsion. One of the other methods of swimming that can occur is an appendicular swimmer. So basically some of these are little animals that have little arms and legs that they can use to swim around in the water, like little copepods, right? They'll take their little legs and they can beat those little legs and swim up towards the surface or swim around in the water. Okay, so they can be an appendicular swimmer. Other things will use undulations of the body. So imagine like a sea snake, right? How a sea snake moves back and forth. Okay, that's like an undulation of the body. And you'll have several things that will swim with that method. The larvaceans will use that. Worms, fish, whales, they'll all use like undulations of the body to swim. So these two things on the left here, those are dinoflagellates. So those are going to be little single-celled plants. And then you've got your big jellyfish, okay, which will be using jet propulsion to swim. And dinoflagellates use the flagella. The other way, one of the other ways that a plant or animal can stay near the surface is to reduce their sinking rate. So they do tend to sink in salt water, and so they want to decrease the rate at which they're sinking. And so one of the ways that they can do that is by increasing their buoyancy. So they'll increase their buoyancy either by storing oil in their cells, okay, because oil is less dense than water, so it helps them to float. Or they'll store like air, okay, have like little air bubbles. And again, because air is less dense than water, it helps them to float. The other thing that they will do is they will actually have a large surface area because it increases the frictional drag. Okay, so basically, we'll use like the analogy of a car to kind of help you understand this. When you have air moving over your car, okay, as you're driving down the freeway, that air is creating friction and creates drag, which tends to slow your car down, which is why like when you're driving, you have to keep your foot on the gas, right, to keep it going forward. When you take your foot off the gas, one of the things that helps to slow your car down is the friction of that air moving over the surface of your car. And that's why like sports cars and stuff, they're very streamlined to try and reduce that drag to help them to go faster. Okay, so that's what drag is. Okay, when a little animal is in the water, okay, as it's moving, like sinking down in the water, as the water is moving over the surface of its body, it's also creating drag, which can slow down the animal. If it has a larger surface area, so if it's like able to spread itself out more, it's able to increase the amount of drag that gets produced and reduce how fast it sinks because the drag slows it down. Does that make sense? So like that would be the equivalent of like making your car into this big like giant box and like trying to get as much friction as possible, which we don't do because that'd be terrible for gas, right? Efficiency. So, but That's what the animals in the ocean try and do. Spread themselves out, create lots of surface area so that they slow their sinking rate down. Okay? They'll do that either by like having projections off of their body or like being elongated and flattened. Okay? Here's a couple pictures. So this is a radiolarian on the left. So you can see all the spikes and projections from their body to help to increase the surface area. And then a mantis shrimp larva here on the right has like an elongated tail and these spikes coming off of it to, again, try and increase the surface area. Okay. And reduce the rate at which they sink. And then here's your little diatoms with oil droplets inside to help to increase their buoyancy. So not only do animals have to stay afloat in order to survive, but they also have to avoid predation to stay alive. So avoid being eaten by their predators. One of the ways that many of the animals that live in the open ocean avoid predation is by being transparent. Because in the open ocean, there's not really anything around for you to hide behind. So the best bet for you is to be see-through so that your predators hopefully just look right through you and don't see you. So many of them are see-through. So for example, like these salps that we talked about, right? The only part of the salp that you can actually see are these little black dots. That's just like the digestive system of them. Their whole body is like this barrel-shaped body, but it's see-through, okay? Or like our sea butterfly, right? It's see-through, okay? So they are transparent in order to try and hide from predators. The fish and stuff that live here are going to be counter-shaded. You guys remember what counter-shading is? Yeah, dark on top, light on the bottom. So that's going to help them to blend in from above and below. But in the open ocean, it actually helps them to blend in from the side as well, okay, which is kind of interesting. And you have this picture in your notes, but we're going to imagine that we have two fish, one that's counter-shaded and looks like this at the top, and then another one that's completely blue, right? So this color blue up at the top. If you take that solid blue fish and you stick it in the water in the open ocean, here's what would happen, okay? So that dark blue on the top, okay, it's dark blue on the bottom as well. When the sunlight comes in through the surface of the water and hits the dorsal side of this fish, it's going to cause that dorsal side to look lighter, right? Because the sun's hitting it. It's going to look brighter, okay? Whereas the belly or the ventral side of the fish is in shadow, okay? Because it's not getting hit by light and you don't have light coming up from underneath from the deep sea. So that looks even darker, okay? So the top looks lighter and the bottom looks darker, and this solid colored fish in the open ocean is very obvious, yeah? If you take a counter-shaded fish and you stick it in the water, this on the right is what happens. It has a dark dorsal side, so it helps to protect it from above, but also when that light hits that dark dorsal side and makes the dark dorsal side look brighter, okay, that's fine, right? That's good, okay? And then now that light ventral side, okay, because is in shadow, but because it's a lighter color, it doesn't look as dark as it would if it was that dark blue, and therefore it helps to break up this fish from the side as well. Kind of cool, huh? So counter shading, it's a good thing for these little fishies. So many of the fish that you find out here in the open ocean will have that counter shading. To try and avoid being eaten. Many animals will also try and like hang out in big groups to avoid being eaten. So like the siphonophores and stuff and salps that we've been talking about, they will try and be in big groups. Basically, they're relying on like their neighbor getting eaten and not them. So, you know, hang out in a big group to, you know, hopefully not get eaten. So like the Portuguese man of war is a bunch of animals living together. That they try and not get eaten that way. And then like we talked about with fish,